Good evening, everyone. It's a true honor to welcome you all here this evening for what promises to be a thought-provoking presentation. I'm Nancy Glenn, the President of Women's Philanthropy at the Jewish Federation of Detroit. Women's Philanthropy is dedicated to empowering women through education, volunteering, and philanthropy to address the needs of the Jewish community locally, in Israel, and around the globe. We offer a variety of innovative programs designed for women at all stages of life and help raise critical funds for our community and international partners. We welcome you to join our programs and efforts to ensure that the security and well-being of all of us are met. Our partnership for this event broadens the reach of our organizations and deepens our relationships with one another. We are living in extraordinary times, and it is more important than ever for us to be knowledgeable about the critical issues we face together. Thank you for inviting Women's Philanthropy to be a part of this important conversation. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for this evening, Ruth Bergman, the Director of Education at the Holocaust Center. Ruth leads museum education and tours for students and adults, and she also conducts teacher training workshops across the state of Michigan. She holds a bachelor's degree from Columbia University and has completed graduate work at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Additionally, Ruth has completed a certificate in Jewish leadership for educators from the Spertus Institute for Jewish Learning and Leadership, as well as a certificate in nonprofit leadership from the Kellogg School of Management. Prior to her role at the Holocaust Center, Ruth was a dedicated teacher and a teaching coach. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Ruth Bergman.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for coming this evening. So there's this organization called Jew Belong. You might not have heard of it. You might still not have heard of it. All right, if we can flip the, well, they'll fix it. Anyway, Jew Belong is an organization that is dedicated to celebrating Judaism and talking about anti-Semitism. And what I was going to show you is their bright pink, Barbie pink billboards that you may have seen. Oh, there you go. Thank you. All over major cities. There's even one, I believe, on the lodge heading downtown. Okay, so anyway, Jew Belong put out a call asking people to submit their experiences with anti-Semitism. And the response was tremendous, unfortunately. And what they did was they took all of these responses that they got and they organized them by topic. And then they published them in an online booklet that you can access that is called Horns, Jesus, Pennies. Why is that the name? Well, I'm going to give you a few examples of the submissions. I visited a friend in middle school in North Carolina whose classmate asked me how I hid my horns. 6th grade. Told it was my people's fault that Jesus was crucified. We stood on the sidelines and spat at him on his way to the crucifixion. Apparently, this is what was portrayed during the Passion of the Christ, meaning the movie. Another one, kids used to throw down pennies and ask us kids to pick them up. My 7th grade teacher made me sit in a chair with a swastika drawn on it because, quote, there were no other chairs. And the last one that was submitted, and by the way, those all were pretty young kids, okay? This one, on social media, we were debating the recent escalation from Hamas, and a Palestinian woman said she'd kill me and all the Jews. No one in the discussion group called her out. Not one person. So this is real, and we know it. And sometimes it's obvious, and sometimes it's so subtle, what they call a dog whistle, that you get that pit in your stomach, but you're not really sure why you know it's anti-Semitic, but you do. And what I'm hoping you're going to come away with here tonight is having some of that language so that you can identify and understand those tropes and the history of where they come from and how they evolved and what they look like today, and how Nazi ideology was founded on these ideas that have existed for 2,000 years, and how contemporary anti-Semitism is based on Nazi ideology, plus, all of those tropes. That's my plan for us for this evening. So, the first thing that we need to do before we can talk about anti-Semitism is we need to define it. And that would seem like it's a fairly easy thing to do, but of course we're Jews and we argue about everything. But, we'll get to that in a minute. Okay, so, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance has what they call a working definition of anti-Semitism. And as a matter of fact, that definition is right across the hall in our museum to the left of the Reverend King quote that is on the wall. And this is what they say. Anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred toward Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed towards Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. And then they go on to explain that manifestations might include targeting the state of Israel, conceived as a Jewish collectivity. However, they make sure to let us know, criticism of Israel similar to that leveled against any country cannot be regarded as anti-Semitic. Anti-Semitism frequently charges Jews with conspiring to harm humanity, and it is often used to blame Jews for why things go wrong. It is expressed in speech, writing, visual forms and actions, and it employs sinister stereotypes and negative character traits. What's important to understand here is that the core idea of anti-Semitism is that Jews are viewed as an existential threat to humanity. If you remember nothing else tonight, remember that. In other words, the idea that Jews are a threat to the rest of the world. So if you want to be safe, you got to watch out for those Jews. That's anti-Semitism. So this goes way beyond good old-fashioned xenophobia, right? This goes beyond not liking the other. This goes beyond Haman saying to Achashverosh in the Purim story, those people are weird. They have different laws and they do different things, which is kind of funny in an empire of 127 provinces where everybody was different. But it was xenophobia. But this is the idea that Jews are evil and that Jews are a threat to humanity. So, I want you to take that definition, put it in your pocket for just a second. I'm going to give you another understanding of anti-Semitism, and then I'm going to put them together, okay? So David Nuremberg, who is a scholar and wrote a book called Anti-Judaism, the Western Tradition, he defines what he calls anti-Judaism, and we can get into the differences between anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism, but I wouldn't worry about it too much. He says anti-Judaism is a way of positioning oneself in relation to another mode of thought, imagined as Judaism, but which has nothing to do with real Judaism. In other words, when you don't like something, that thing is Jewy, right? So I'll give you an example. There was a huge debate in the church about iconography. Is iconography a good thing or not a good thing? Huge debate with all kinds of theological and practical implications. Those who were in favor of iconography accused the people who were against iconography as being Jewy, or they were Judaized, right? They were influenced by Judaism. This has nothing to do with Judaism at all. But the opposition to it, that's Jewish. And the reverse. The people who were opposed to iconography leveled the same accusations at the people who were for iconography.
What is iconography?
Oh, thank you. Iconography, the idea of having icons or statues of saints and the Holy Family to look at and to revere, and the idea was that by looking at them and contemplating the sacrifices that they made, it would bring you a closer spiritual connection to God. Thank you for asking. So, let's take out the two definitions now and see how they work together. All right, so if we start in the middle, the idea is the belief. Jews are an existential threat. And now this manifests in two ways. It manifests through acting out expressions of hate, whether that's through word or deed. And this gets you to the IRA definition, right? International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, everyone calls it IRA. And it also is intellectual, psychological, emotional. It's the idea of this positioning that if you are against an idea, that idea is Jewish. Okay. So now we have a working definition of anti-Semitism. But why does it manifest the way it does? Where do these tropes and ideas come from? Why was that kid asked about his horns? What's up with the pennies? So that's what we're going to take a look at next. So, we have what I call the AntiSemitism Toolbox. And this actually comes from ADL. This is their image. And if you go to ADL and you go to this site, they actually have these wonderful 2-3-minute videos on each one of these tropes. So if you want to learn more about it, it's just a quick, easy way to get a little bit more understanding. So let's start with the middle, with deicide. So let me just get my notes in order here. Deicide means killing God. Okay, that was the reference that was made to the movie The Passion of the Christ. Now, William Nichols, who was a Protestant theologian and a historian, wrote a book called Christian Anti-Semitism, A History of Hate. And he felt as a Christian theologian that only Christians can end Christian anti-Semitism. And he wrote a book that goes through a lot of the history and a lot of the thinking from the beginning of Christianity all the way through to contemporary times. And he says that Christianity founded anti-Semitism and that it is responsible for eradicating it. He explains that all religions are powered by myth, meaning the origin story, or as he calls it, the charter story, that tells believers who they are and where they fit into the divine plan. And the origin story of Christianity has to be based in history in order for it to make sense. So in that story, Jews, real Jews, your neighbor sitting next to you, not some idea of evil far away long ago, before the creation when forces of good fought forces of evil. No, the person sitting right next to you, real Jews, are cast as the enemies of Christ and God. It doesn't matter that modern scholarship, he says, argues that some features of the myth are untrue. And to this day, there are many people who believe it to be historically and literally true. And I want to make something really, really clear, and I say this every time I talk about this subject, it's very important. I am not in any way, shape, or form saying that all people of various Christian faiths are anti-Semitic. Not in any way, shape, or form. But this is the history, and we need to understand the history. It's the reason why William Nichols wrote the book. And I'm going to show you a beautiful statue in a little bit that's going to show you about the change in the relationships between the Christian communities and the Jewish communities. So I just want to be really clear about that. The story of deicide, however, makes Jews a permanent target for Christian hostility and contempt. That until Christ returns, the Jews are meant to live in subjugation and as wanderers upon the earth. And in the Christian state, beginning with Constantine, theological beliefs were codified into law that legally discriminated against Jews and kept them subordinate. Now, Raoul Hilberg created a famous table that shows a remarkable number of similarities between canonical law and Nazi anti-Jewish laws. It actually happens to also be in Nichols' book. He prints it out. The one difference, though, is that because of St. Augustine, who lived in the 5th century, canonical law could not lead to a final solution. According to Augustine, the Jews must be preserved, but in misery. They are to remain witnesses to their own crimes, bearers of the mark of Cain, and like Cain, protected from murder by others. There could be, and there were, massacres and suffering, but there was no genocide. But as Nichols says, loss of religious authority in the secular world removed that Augustinian restriction. So that's where we start. And the Jews are accused of being literally the children of Satan, the devil's spawn. And those who were followers of this new tradition were the children of light. Well, once you're in league with Satan, what can't you do? Right? Once you're in league with the devil, that means that you have power. And that means that you will do anything that you can to achieve your nefarious ends. So, blood libel. The idea that Jews would kidnap and kill innocent people, usually children, drain them of their blood, and use the blood to bake matzah. You're laughing, but I have to tell you this accusation still exists today in parts of the world. It is written as if it's historically true. There was a famous case in 1840, and in 1840, the U.S. ambassador, the Secretary of State, I believe it was, said, well, we'll just have to see what the trial bears out. Okay? But this story makes sense. The first accusation was 1154, little William of Norwich of England. Okay, little boy disappeared, and the Jews were accused of doing something terrible. If you're willing to murder Jesus, then in every generation, you're willing to murder an innocent, the symbol of good, because that's what Jews do. And of course, you're going to want to have power. You're going to be the force behind the curtain. In today's world, you may have heard it in terms of Zog, the Zionist-occupied government, right? That the Jews are the shadow puppets who are really the ones who are behind all kinds of political movements. We'll get to that later. And then, of course, Jews are disloyal. This is a picture, if you can't see it, of Alfred Dreyfus. And, of course, he's dehumanized here as a snake or an alligator, right? He was accused of disloyalty. And, of course, greed. Because, after all, Judas sold out Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. And we will get to Holocaust denial and anti-Semitism in a little bit. And what we need to understand is that anti-Semitism is baked into Western civilization, hence the title of David Nuremberg's book. I read an article a few years ago, and somebody was talking about, they were describing someone as being very pedantic and nitpicky and obsessed with details. And the term that they used was he was Pharisaic, having no idea, truly no idea of the origins of that phrase, of the Pharisees, the scholars who eventually become what we call the rabbis of the Talmud. Now, I'm not accusing this person of being anti-Semitic. The phrase is so much a part of our language and our civilization, we don't even think about it. Calling someone a Judas, meaning they're a traitor. And talking about people wanting their 30 pieces of silver. In other words, they'll take money and be disloyal. So, I want to give you just a few quick examples in art where we can see that this anti-Semitism is literally carved in stone. So, this is Ecclesia and Synagoga. And they are outside of several cathedrals, including Strasbourg, Bamberg, Paris, and Bordeaux. And so you walk into the cathedral, and it's not enough to say, this is our religion, and it's a beautiful religion, and contemplate the sacrifices that were made on behalf of humanity. It has to also say, this is what we're not. Now, what you notice that's really interesting here, and you can find these again, these images are available easily online. I know it's not so easy to see them up here on the slides, but they're both beautiful, and they both have beautiful robes. But Ecclesia has a crown, and her staff is full and straight, and she has a chalice, a wine cup. and she's looking ahead or to the side proudly. Synagoga does not have a crown. She's blindfolded because she refuses to see the truth. Her staff is broken. And you can't tell from this picture, but what she's holding in her hand is an upside down Torah or Ten Commandments, depending on the figure. So again, this is something that people see every single time they pass by these cathedrals. So when I say it's carved into Western civilization, like I said, I mean that literally. But here's the other one I wanted to show you. This is a statue called Synagoga and Ecclesia in our time. It's a sculpture by Joshua Kaufman, and it depicts synagogue and church as proud, crowned women who live in covenant with God and learn from each other's texts and traditions. So when we talk about things change and relationships change, and then I'm not saying that all people who are of Christian faith or of any faith are patently anti-Semitic. I think that this is a beautiful example of the two learning together. And this particular one, there's several of these statues that were created. This one is at St. Joseph University in Philadelphia at the Institute for Jewish Catholic Relations. Okay. And then we have the Udanta. Udanta means Jewish pig. And these are different images, on different buildings, cathedrals, churches, and they all have the same really disgusting imagery. You have a sow, a female pig, and you have a rabbi who is lifting up the hind legs of the animal and learning Talmud from the butt of the animal. And you have pigs, and this pig actually has the face of a Jew, and you have other Jews, and you can tell by their hats and their distinctive clothing, and they are suckling at the pig. Now, the four that I have here, Brandenburg, Wittenberg Town Church, that's the one where Luther preached. This one is Cathedral of St. Martin in Colmar, and this one is in Sweden. So they're all over. They exist, and actually the one in Wittenberg is considered to be a World Heritage Site. And even though there was a court case brought to have it covered up or defaced or taken down or something, the case was lost because of its cultural significance. So it's still up there. Okay. So those are the roots of anti-Semitism, and that's how anti-Semitism managed to wake its way through 1300s, 1400s, 1500s. And it's very much religiously based, and you see all of these tropes over and over again. But then the world started to change, or at least Europe started to change. And we start to enter the modern period. And now we're going to see anti-Semitism changing. Because one of the ways I'd like people to think about anti-Semitism when they're not thinking about a toolbox is to think about a mannequin. And with the mannequin, you just keep changing the outfits. The mannequin stays the same. Right? The anti-Semitism stays the same. The hatred stays the same. But the outfit, the language, what's in style, the way of talking about anti-Semitism changes. Now, the old ones don't go away, so actually your mannequin just starts looking like the Michelin Man, I guess, but gets fuller and fuller. But the idea is that it can morph. And it morphs because the hatred is there, and people just need to find a different way of expressing it. So, in the 19th century, European nations established constitutions, and there was the principle of equality under the law. They dropped residence restrictions and or occupational restrictions on Jews and on other minorities. Now, there was a rapid economic change. There was social dislocation. People don't like change. People get very nervous when there's change. For every action, there's a reaction. And even though the emancipation of the Jews allowed them to live and work among non-Jews, it also exposed them to a new form of anti-Semitism. Political anti-Semitism, national anti-Semitism, or I should say nationalist anti-Semitism. And what we will see as pseudoscientific anti-Semitism. The anti-Semitism is there, but people understood that you couldn't talk about it in religious terms anymore because that wasn't getting people excited. But you could talk about it in nationalistic terms. Jews are displacing non-Jews in professions traditionally reserved for Christians. Jews are being overrepresented in future-oriented professions. And the future-oriented professions of the late 19th century were finance, banking, trade, industry, medicine, law, journalism, art, music, theater, and literature. In other words, everything. Jews were involved in it. There were too many Jews. So then we have this term that gets developed called anti-Semitism. And I've been using this term all along, and I've been using it a little bit anachronistically, and that's okay. There's no such thing as a Semite, which is why you may have noticed that nowadays anti-Semitism is written as one word, no capital S. There are Semitic languages, right? And there are Romance languages, and there are Slavic languages. There are language families. And you can learn a lot about different languages based on their similarities with their sister languages. So for example, Aramaic, Arabic, Hebrew are sister languages. French, Italian, Spanish are Romance languages. But what people decided to do was they decided that they could categorize people based on the way we categorize language. And that you can make all kinds of assumptions about people based on the languages that they spoke. And surprise, surprise, the people who spoke Aryan or Anglo-Saxon or Northern European languages, well, they were just the superior races. And they talked about races. And they talked about people being classified by their races. And this became known as anti-Semitism. And this term, by the way, was used with great pride. So Wilhelm Marr, who's the person who coined this term, formed the League of Anti-Semites in 1878. And he thought that it was so much more respectable to talk about anti-Semitism because it was sciencey and not that old-fashioned Judenhass, just hatred of Jews. And he wrote a pamphlet in 1878 called The Victory of Judaism over Germandom. And I want you to listen to what he says. He says, "There's no stopping them. German culture has proved itself ineffective and powerless against this foreign power. This is a fact, a brutal, inescapable fact. State, church, Catholicism, Protestantism, creed, and dogma are all brought low before the Jewish tribunal, that is, the irreverent daily press which the Jews control." This should all sound frighteningly familiar, right? All those tropes that we are so familiar with. These ideas of conspiracy theories, these ideas that the Jews are in league with the devil, that the Jews have power, all of this is now being spoken of, not in terms of blood libel or host desecration or all of the poisoning the wells and spreading, Black Plague. Now it's being discussed in political, economic, nationalistic terms. So if you take that and you add eugenics, which is a discredited theory that aims to improve the quality of human population through selective breeding, and of course we all know who gets to select that breeding, to improve the fitness of future generations. It's based on a complete misunderstanding of Darwin and of Gregor Mendel. It's also linked to racism, imperialism, and its tactics included segregation, forced sterilization, and social exclusion. And as many of us know, Nazi Germany used eugenics to support the extermination of people it considered to be socially inferior. So we have this ultra-nationalistic idea that Jews are not German, that there's this ethnicity, or what they called a race, and Jews don't belong. And yet they're here in our country. And this is true not just in Germany, this is true in France, this is true in England, and eugenics, by the way, was all over the place, okay? You add to that social Darwinism, which again is taking Darwinism, it's taking a scientific theory and trying to apply it to social conditions, talking about societies or races being in an existential struggle with other races for survival. And of course, that became a philosophical rationalization for all kinds of imperialism and racist policies, sustaining the belief that Anglo-Saxon and Aryan cultures are superior. And this thinking, of course, eventually would lead to this notion that we see in Nazism, that Mein Kampf, my struggle, the struggle of the German people, is against the Jewish race, because the Jewish race, again, is an existential threat, and it's them or us. And if the Jews remain alive, we are not safe. And the Nazis truly believed, even at the end of the war, even in his bunker on his dying days, Hitler believed, if you kill the Jews, we'll win the war. Because the war, in great part, was about killing the Jews. And of course, if you win the war, then you can finish off killing the Jews. So you have this mix of anti-Semitism and nationalism and eugenics and social Darwinism, and you can see how Nazism is going to take all of these ideas that already existed and weaponize them into something absolutely horrible. But before we get there, I want to mention one other thing, which is the greatest conspiracy of them all, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Right? It's a work of it's entirely a fiction. It was first written in Russia, they think in 1903, but really 1905. It was written as an appendix to, get this title, The Great in the Small, the Coming of the Antichrist and the Rule of Satan on Earth. And it talks about these 24 protocols, these 24 meetings that the Jews had to plot their takeover of the world. And it describes these plans by manipulating the economy, controlling the media, fostering religious conflict. This is not any different from what you saw in the earlier pamphlet by Wilhelm Marr. By 1917, with the Russian Revolution and people fleeing westward, the protocols were brought to the West. And then, of course, they made it to Europe, to the United States, and, of course, spread around famously by our personal Detroit hero, Henry Ford. Yes. Okay. So, the protocols did play an important part in Nazi thought, and they were a big part of the Nazi arsenal of propaganda. They published at least 23 editions of the protocols between 1919 and 1939. And in some schools, they started to use the protocols as a way of indoctrinating students. So, just want to show you a few examples. In a children's book, we actually have the cover of it and some of the pages in our museum that you can take a look at. But this is called The Poisonous Mushroom. And as the mother explains to the child in this book, just like you can't always tell the good mushrooms from the bad mushrooms, you can't always tell a Jew from a Gentile. Even though at the same time they're talking about Jewish characteristics that should make it easy to be able to tell Jews from non-Jews. So don't expect any logic. And by the way, if you're having a discussion with someone about anti-Semitism and you think that it's worthwhile and you're going to learn from each other, that's great. But you can't have a rational conversation about irrational things. So when you start getting into the realm of the irrational, just call it a day. Okay, so this is the cover. And then here you have your stereotypical, really scary-looking, creepy, bad vision, thick glasses, hairy, just pedophile, right? Here, my little one, you get something very sweet, but as a reward, you must come with me. Just, ew, right? And then on another page, again, you have this, false science about the Jewish nose, and it looks like the number 6. And the number 6, of course, is associated with Satan. So all the pieces are fitting together oh so nicely. And then finally, the perfect Aryan family looking up at the crucifix and what Christ said about the Jews. Whenever you see a crucifix, think of the horrible murder of Jesus by the Jews. Okay. And we know that the indoctrination starts with the children, right? And then you will have an entire generation growing up believing these things. So, let's talk about anti-Semitism today. There's a focus, of course, on Jewish power and conspiracy theories, which is no different from what we saw before. What? Oh, sorry. So, just as an example, the Udanta I showed you before, and a cartoon from 2015. Okay, and it's the same. You can see how they're just using the same image, only here the Rothschild, which is representative of the Jews, the money, and Boko Haram, and Israel, and America, and Al-Qaeda, and ISIS, and they're just throwing everything in there, right? And that the nefarious puppet masters, or in this case, the Udanta was controlling everything. This was from 1937, tuberculosis, syphilis, and cancer. They're all bad, but nothing's as bad as the Jew is pretty much what this says. And you can see again the stereotypical Jewish face, the big nose, the dark hair, frightening. And then this from just a few years ago about never let a crisis go to waste, an anti-Semitic canard, Mashiach now. COVID-19 gives plausible deniability to their engineered economic collapse. Right? We've seen this, we lived through this. But the images are taken right out of the playbook. And then this one doesn't say Jew, no Jewish star. You might kind of second guess yourself, except of course you got the face again. But the idea and the word capital, I mean, I know the Capital One is also the car where the slogan was, what's in your wallet, but capital, capitalism, Jews, I mean, it's the perfect credit card to use for this image, and the money and the data hacking, and who's behind it all? The Jew. Okay. So, and according to defense attorney Kenneth Stern, historically, Jews have not fared well around conspiracy theories. I don't know who would. But he says such ideas fuel anti-Semitism. The myths that all Jews are responsible for the death of Christ, or poisoned the wells, or killed Christian children to bake matzahs, or made up the Holocaust, or plot to control the world, they don't succeed each other. The list of canards just gets longer. The protocols today are still being published, and there was a U.S. Department of State's report on global anti-Semitism, and this is back in 2004. That says that the clear purpose of the protocols is to incite hatred of Jews in Israel. The books are available worldwide, even in countries with hardly any Jews, such as Japan. So, Nazi ideology is alive and well today, and so is Holocaust denial. And Holocaust denial is really a conspiracy theory. Holocaust denial is not about the factual, what I call the factiness of the Holocaust. That's not what it's about. So if somebody tries to tell you that the Holocaust didn't happen or it wasn't so bad, don't try to show them the evidence that it happened, because that's not what it's about. It's not about history. It's about what's permissible in the present and imagined future. If Hitler is not the worst thing of all, if what he did wasn't so bad, if maybe there was an article the other day in the paper that, that was saying that there are people who are making the argument that actually Churchill was the warmonger and Hitler was the one who wanted peace, right? If you're going to start saying that, then anything is possible. And you start questioning the entire world order, everything you think you know, and that leaves people very, very afraid and gullible and open to believing anything, and of course they're open to believing the person who has the answer, whoever that person is. And if Nazis are in fact the ultimate evil, but we know from 2,000 years of anti-Semitism that Jews are the ultimate evil, then it stands to reason that the Jews are Nazis. And if it's not only okay, but actually for the benefit of humanity to get rid of Nazis, then it is for the benefit of humanity to get rid of today's Nazis, meaning the Jews. Okay. This is not a right or a left issue. It's on both sides. And Deborah Lipstadt talks about this, and she says it's a hatred that can be described as a horseshoe. And some of you may have heard this horseshoe idea before, where the far left and the far right are closer to one another than they are to the center. That's why it's called a horseshoe. And on the issues of anti-Semitism, you see that on the far right and on the far left. And she says, if you can only see the anti-Semitism on the opposite side of your political spectrum, then I have to question, she says, whether your battle is with anti-Semitism or with your political opponents. The other point that she makes is if you get into a right-left argument, you're going to get distracted from the conversation about anti-Semitism. And one of the ways that I want to sort of conclude with this is in talking about Israel and the idea that the current anti-Israel, anti-Zionist rhetoric, which we could spend another 4 hours talking about, and I've got like 3 minutes to do this, okay? But it draws again from Nazi ideology and from communism, from both authoritarian traditions. The founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, Hassan al-Banna, was a great admirer of Hitler, and he quoted from Mein Kampf, and they would send people to the Nuremberg rallies every year. But in the 1950s, communism started to speak in very anti-Zionist terms as well. They viewed themselves as not anti-Semitic at first because they were the ones who defeated the Nazis, but of course they were anti-Semitic, and they used anti-cosmopolitanism as during those purges in order to bring out their anti-Semitism. And they, again, they started to create these stereotypes that were picked up by the politicians in the Middle East. Jews are powerful, evil, murderous. Only now they're applying it not only to Jews, but to the state of Israel as an entity. And all the things that were being said about Jews are being said about the state, that the state of Israel is an existential threat to humanity. And you've got it on the right, and you've got it on the left. It's in both places. And Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, who completed his PhD in Moscow in 1982, hold on, I lost my page. He uses typical Soviet-era Soviet-era propaganda to talk about the fascistic, imperialistic, racist ideology that is Zionism, the enemy of socialism and national liberation movements. So again, we see this in all aspects of our modern day. Here we go. I knew I had my last pages. Okay. And it's this, again, this is not about a criticism of Israel's policies. This is stating that the very existence of the Jewish state is an existential threat. And so we have to continue teaching about the Holocaust and Nazi-era anti-Semitism because it still exists today. And we also have to pay attention to the Nazi or anti-Semitic ideology wherever we see it. I'm not going to read it to you, but if you feel like depressing yourself, you can go online to the Avalon Project through Yale University and read the Hamas Charter and see what it has to say. But I want to end with this. Could we bring up that other page, please? The mission of the Zekelman Holocaust Center is not to depress, deject, and deflate. It is to engage, educate, and empower by remembering the Holocaust. And I don't want you to leave here feeling frightened or depressed or worried. Okay, you can be a little worried, but mostly I want you to be educated and I want you to be empowered. And I want you to know that even though there are times when we feel like we are alone, and actually I was just talking with Ellie before, and he was saying, and we've all seen this, that a lot of people on social media have maybe fewer friends than they used to have. The fact of the matter is, there are good things that are happening in the fight against anti-Semitism, and that's what I want you to leave here thinking about. So Deborah Lipstadt actually just talked about this, and she actually was interviewed by Dana Bash a little while ago. You may have seen it. It popped up on Instagram and other places. But anyway, it's the Global Guidelines for Countering Anti-Semitism. And there were 40 nations that signed on to this. And if we could scroll down a little bit through it, you can see it gives all kinds of, and you can stop, thank you, all kinds of ways that governments, states, no matter what their social or political context, what they can do to help fight anti-Semitism. And as Deborah Lipstadt points out, a lot of the things that are mentioned here are also things that we can do, whether we're Jewish or we're allies of our Jewish friends and colleagues. That we can educate, we can speak out, we can do all kinds of things. And this is what I want us to leave with. And if we scroll down a little bit further, and you can just see some of the countries that signed onto it, because it lists all of them. There you go. It's in alphabetical order, of course. But you can see all these countries that they have their challenges, they have their difficulties. No country is perfect, ours included. But they all signed on to this, and we can kind of stop it there just so people can read it. Slovakia, where my mom comes from, Serbia, Romania, Poland, Paraguay. People are trying to do something, and they are trying to make a difference. And that's what I want us to leave here with. So I'm hoping that now you have a little bit of an understanding of where it comes from, why it exists, how it morphed, why it won't go away. And we might not be able to fight anti-Semitism, but with knowledge we can fight anti-Semites. And we can work with our colleagues and our allies to fight anti-Semitism and make the world a little bit safer, not just for Jews, but for everybody. So thank you very much. We'll now have a Q&A, and I have a request. There's going to be a dessert reception after the Q&A, and I invite anyone who has any comments, thoughts that you want to share with me or with anybody else to please feel free to do so. But let's save this time right now for questions, okay? So Rick and Harry have the mic, and Gabi will help me because I can't quite see everybody. So if you raise your hand, we'll come over to you with the mic, and they will hold on to the mic. Okay, you don't have to worry about holding on to the mic. So right here in the second row, Harry. Lady in the pink. I think it's
a lot about Judaism, anti-Semitism, and Christianity, but I didn't hear her mention anything about anti-Semitism and Islam.
Do you want to speak on anti-Semitism and its relationship
Sure.
to Islam?
So that's what I spoke about briefly at the end when I was talking about the Middle East and the anti-Zionism. But you're right, the history of anti-Semitism and Islam, and both its influences through Christianity and its own, is a whole other topic. Part of the point of what I wanted to talk about today was looking at those connections to Nazi ideology and Holocaust denial. So you're right, there are many, many things that we could be talking about. Anti-Semitism, unfortunately, is a very big topic, and I was not able to talk about everything. You should see how much I had to cut from my notes just to talk about this in 40 minutes. But I appreciate you wanting to know more about that. Thank you. Yes.
So I'm a professor at Macomb Community College, and I teach sociology. So we get to talk about all kinds of really deep topics. And I was just wondering, I love the images, I love your explanation. Is there any way that I can either get your presentation or I can talk to you afterward or whatever?
Sure.
I'd love that. I would love to be able to share that.
I'd love
Thank
to
you.
share it.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, some people in the back, yeah.
You want to hold it? Okay. You didn't talk about diversity, equity, inclusion. You didn't talk about critical race theory. In the Farmington schools, there was a proclamation. You try to separate people by the color of their skin. And it didn't make reference to their capabilities or anything else. The good news is I complained about it enough and it somehow magically disappeared.
And
But
your
it's
question?
going on in corporate America.
Yes.
It's going on in the college campus. It's part of the reason why we have, besides the Islam thing, which you didn't discuss.
Is there a question?
So my question is, why aren't we talking about that? Those are the key issues of today. I agree with everything else you said. That's no problem. But there's a big...
I appreciate what everyone is saying. I have taught semester-long and year-long courses on anti-Semitism. I had to be very, very clear and specific about what it is that I wanted to talk about tonight and what I wanted you to walk away with tonight. I could not cover everything. But if this is something that you're interested in, there are lots and lots of opportunities to learn more about this and other subjects. If not through the Zeckelman Holocaust Center, then certainly through all of the educational opportunities around town. But I do hear what you're saying. Thank you. Harry, yes.
Well, I'm going to have to turn my comment into a question. My question is, I assume you're aware of the protesters in Ann Arbor, in front of the synagogue in Ann Arbor, who are using anti-Semitic signs. And I am here, I'm an attorney. I'm the attorney that sued the protesters. And I'm here to warn you and inform you. It didn't turn out very well. Anti-Semitism has actually infiltrated the federal courts. And it's a long story, but we were seeking a traditional remedy. Legal remedy would be a reasonable time, place, and manner restriction on the protesters who are still in front of the synagogue every Saturday morning with signs that say,
And your question, sir?
what? Well,
Your question?
Yeah, sorry, is there a question?
Is there a question?
the point is, the court assessed a fine against
Yes.
of $158,000 against me and my two Jewish clients, one of whom was a Holocaust survivor. So you should be aware that there is anti-Semitism in the courts.
Thank you. Let's discuss this later. Thank you. Any other questions, anyone?
The question that I would invite all of you to think about, you don't have to respond now, but to think about, is what can we do to create the change we want to see? So whether that's through political activism, through letters to the editor, through voting, through getting involved in organizations, that's the question we have to ask. I don't deny that all of these things are happening. That's why we're having this conversation tonight. But again, our goal, our mission is to engage, educate, and empower. It is incumbent upon all of us to decide what we want to do about it, and different people have different ways of dealing with it. So you are using your legal skills, God bless you. Some of us use our teaching skills. I understand, but you still stood up for what you believed in. I understand, and I'm sorry. Okay, I think we have time for 2 or 3 more questions. Yes, sir.
Do you feel it's important for Jews to be more visible in their day-to-day lives? For example, by wearing kippahs or Jewish insignia?
Yes. This gentleman would like to know if it's important for Jews to be more visible than ever by wearing kippot or Jewish stars. So I wasn't going to necessarily show this slide because, I'm also a member of the Jewish community and I'm married to a rabbi and I didn't want to end up sounding like too preachy, but I'm going to bring up this slide, and I have to thank my colleague, Dr. Katie Chaka-Parks, who used this slide in another presentation, and it reminded me of this quote that I hadn't thought about in a long time. And this is by Martin Buber. He wrote this in 1933. And this will also relate to what's going on in the universities, although he's talking about small children. He says, the children are experiencing what's happening and are silent. But at night they awaken from their nightmares and stare into the darkness. The world has become so uncertain and so untrustworthy. One had a friend, but suddenly he became a total stranger and mocks at you. One had a teacher. One felt that in his presence all was in order, but suddenly he lost his voice, refusing to answer questions. In the field where one played with his schoolmates, one has become unwelcome. Parents, educators, how can we help our children? You can translate Jewish values into Jewish living. We must live, yes, live as Jews, as a people, as a community. So if that means for you wearing a Jewish star or a kippah, then that's what you should do. If it means supporting Jewish organizations, that's what you should do. If it means being, ritually observant, then that's what you should do. Be proud of your Judaism, and most importantly, please, please, please don't associate yours, your children, or your grandchildren's Jewish identity only with a reaction to anti-Semitism. Be proud of who you are. And for those friends in the audience who are not of the Jewish tradition, support your Jewish friends and colleagues. Make them feel comfortable and proud in their expressions of their Jewish identity. That's what we can do. So there is the fighting that we can do, and there is the living that we can do. I will take one more question, and then I think it's going to be time for cookies.
I have a question.
Yes. Lynn.
So one of the popes changed and made a doctrine that the Jews did not kill, are not responsible for killing Christ. And is that changed? Is it formally part of the new thinking of the...
Yes, and. Yes, so Second Vatican Council, there were many, many changes and different ways of thinking and calling Judaism the older sibling of Christianity. There's been a lot of movement in that direction, and relations with the Vatican have been great, but there are people who rejected it, and there are people to this day who don't accept that. But again, we have to be grateful and proud of the work that went into creating those statements. And we also have to recognize that no statement, no position of any one organization, even something as strong as the Catholic Church, is going to influence everybody. And so the fight continues. Okay, I want to thank you all very, very much. Do you want to?
Thank you, Ruth. It's edifying not only to hear you tonight, but to work with you every day. Hi, everybody. I'm Gabi Berman. I'm the Director of Communications. We value each and every one of you. If we did not get to your questions and comments, we will continue the conversation in the lobby during the dessert reception. Civic discourse strengthens our community. We have done that tonight, and we will continue to do it, and we will turn all of these expressions of hate, God willing, into expressions of love for future generations. Please come back again. We can keep you very busy this fall. On Sundays, our treasured Holocaust survivors speak every Sunday at noon. You can come and listen to their personal stories. On Tuesday, October 29th, we have a virtual event to commemorate LGBTQ+ History Month. We will host Dr. Jake Newsom. He will untangle the complex motivations that convinced the Nazis to persecute that community and that it was vital to their success to do so. And you can register for that event on our website at holocaustcenter.org. And then to a celebratory moment for us, we are celebrating 40 years. Yes? And on November 10th at Huntington Place, please join us for our anniversary benefit. We are honoring Marcy and Rob Orley, community leaders, and we will get to hear from our own hometown media personality, novelist, broadcaster, Mitch Albom, who will give our keynote address. We would love to see you all there. Thank you so much for being here tonight, and enjoy dessert now.